So now I want to shift continents to a former UK colony and tell you what's going on in the US. I had the pleasure of addressing this audience 4 years ago when I first talked about the Scholarly Publishing Roundtable. I want to bring you up to date on activities that are quite current. So I'll first give you a brief review of what's going on in the U.S. The recent activities focus on a White House memorandum coming from the Office of Science and Technology Policy. This is colloquially known as the President's Science Advisor Office. And a directive went out to all the U.S. Funding agencies on February. I'll tell you about that, and I'll tell you about the response to that directive that has basically come from three quarters. The National Institutes of Health, which many of you know has had a public access policy for more than 5 years and a platform for almost a decade called PubMed Central. The publishers, represented by almost every publisher in this room, as a group, is putting together a response, which is called Chorus. I'm on the steering group of that. I'll tell you about that. That'll be the lion's share of this talk because I want you to understand it. I want you to support it. And those of you coming to Frankfurt will hear about it in more detail when we officially roll it out. Our university and library colleagues in the U.S. Have put a proposal in response to this directive, which they call SHARE. This all sounds like nice naming, nice branding, right? We all sing a song and share the wealth. And then I'll summarize with what happens next. So to just roll back the last 5 years. In 2009, one of our U.S. House of Representatives committees, a House Science Committee, put together a panel much like the Finch Group that included not quite as many stakeholders as the Finch Group. I think the Finch Group did a better job at that for a broader net. The Scholarly Publishing Roundtable had publishers, it had librarians, it had university administrators. And you're probably quite familiar with the report recommendations. They were reasonably balanced. They promoted the development of access solutions through engagement with all stakeholders. And those recommendations ended up in U.S. law. One of the first laws signed by President Obama, it was called the America Competes Act of 2010. And virtually all the recommendations in this stakeholder panel ended up in that law. And a primary recommendation gave the job to the President's White House Science Advisor Office to continue to work with all stakeholders, led primarily by a committee of all the representatives of the major funding agency, a funding agency being defined as major if it spent more than $100 million a year. And they were to engage further with all the stakeholders and develop recommendations. That report came out in March of last year. It was a master job of a non-report. It was 45 pages. It had 3 pages of content that basically said, we're working on it. Kick the can down the road. Many of those of us from the publishing community that have played a major role here, as soon as the America Competes Act was out, we started engaging with a couple of the larger agencies, particularly Department of Energy and National Science Foundation. National Institutes of Health, the largest funding agency in the U.S. and actually in the world, $30 billion, already had a policy. So we went down to the next level. NSF, Department of Energy in the U.S. spend $5 billion a year on research. And we started working on a number of initiatives that actually, one of which was a prototype to Chorus, but a baseline initiative was done in concert with Crossref. I'll tell you about that. Most of you know about it because it launched officially at the beginning of this summer, the end of May, called FundRef. And it had really has international roots since it was worked on with Crossref. It has to do with tagging articles with appropriate funding agencies, independent of where the funding agencies are. And of course, you heard from Steve that same summer, the Finch report was issued, and you heard the continuation of the story. I misspoke when I called it a finished story. We hope it comes to some resolution. We hope all of this comes to some resolution. What you just heard about from Eric, what Steve talked about, and what I will tell you about represents a tremendous amount of time that some reasonable segment of our community is investing in the search of pragmatic and sustainable public access policies. We would all like to get them in place and go on with being publishers. That's the ultimate goal. So this February, I'll tell you about this directive, and I'll tell you in particular about the responses to that. The directive required that the agencies deliver their reports about 3 weeks ago, and I'll tell you whether that happened or not. So I won't go into much detail in the report. It's on the famous White House memo from February 22nd. If you just Google it, you'll find it. It's only about a 6-page memo, but it took about 6 months to write. It's highly nuanced. And it basically has some of the general language you've all seen about the advantage of making the results of publicly funded research available, where results are defined as data, agency report, researcher reports, and publications. This memo focused on data and publications. I'm going to tell you primarily about publications. The data situation is less emotional. It's actually more difficult to deal with, but it's less emotional since for the most part, data is not copyrightable. As I said, it applies just to agencies that spend more than $100 million on R&D, but in reality, it'd probably be applied to all the funding agencies in the U.S. It required a draft plan be produced by these agencies in 6 months. That was August 22nd when they were due. In my 3+ decades of working in U.S. science as a working scientist with the 2 agencies I've mentioned, I haven't seen them write a report and get it approved and out in 6 months on anything. Certainly our legislature in the U.S. can't do that either. So that was ambitious, to say the least. These were only draft plans. They had to be reviewed, approved, and then put in place. But it was at least a very definite roadmap. Like the Finch Group report, it recognized that we publishers actually provide a valuable service, okay? And that it was essential that the enterprise, not necessarily any one publisher, but the enterprise of publishing and what we do remain sustainable. And of course, that is often keyed on what we believe is our primary deliverable, and that is maintaining an independent peer review process from a funding agency. This is really, as if you've read the report or you've seen any of this, you'll see that it's really a green policy, because from the beginning of the scholarly publishing roundtable discussions, it was clear that these agencies were not going to be able to ring fence separate funding for Gold OA. They were very clear that Gold OA was fundable, that any researcher could use money for APCs, but there was not going to be a ringed fence set of funds. And so agencies had to come up with a different way of providing public access. That's obviously the green route. And on the controversial nature of whether the embargo was long enough to sustain a source of funding via subscriptions, how much time have we all dealt with what is the appropriate embargo period? it probably took 5 of the 6 months that this memo took to be written by the White House to discuss the 2 sentences about embargoes. And those sentences eventually said it directs the agencies to choose an embargo length, not the publishers, not the other stakeholders, although everyone's weighing in. And here's the language. It suggests 12 months as a guideline, but there's a slight escape clause that says agencies must show some flexibility for other fields. And you can imagine we have tried as a group of publishers to produce evidence on the fact that all 28,000 titles that was in the Ware-Mabe report for 2011, I guess, that our industry produces can't be pigeonholed into one embargo length. It remains to be how successful we are in that. I'm actually heartened to see at least the 1224 bins that you saw in the Finch. So other parts of this plan, of this memo that were key, the primary deliverable is some form of full text made accessible to the public. It doesn't say where, it doesn't say what version. And with the exception of that embargo length, it has a little bit of ambiguity on the length. But it is text. And there were several favorable statements in there in trying to foment interactions with stakeholders, particularly publishers, since we're talking about where we invest our money. It encouraged using existing resources for any of the activities, identifying articles that are tagged with public funding, discoverability of those, providing the access on some platform, and then archiving them in perpetuity. We all do that. We already do that. And I think part of our problems with this miasma in public access is we were seeing other agencies, particularly government agencies, duplicate resources that the publishing community provides. And no one wants to spend money on duplicating resources. And they were very clearly told that whatever the policy that was put together and submitted on August 22nd and then subsequently approved and then subsequently put in place, it had to be done within existing budgets, no new money. And what that means in the US right now, unless our Congress gets brilliant in the next 5 days, they have to fund the US government for fiscal year 2014, which begins on October 1st. They will probably kick the can down the road and just extrapolate the existing budget, which has a 5% cut for most agencies compared to last year. And then in January, it'll be cut another 5%. So this is the environment we're working in here, doing more for less. So when the memo was released, a working group that included representatives from about 40 different agencies started meeting at the end of March every 2 weeks. And a group of publishers very quickly organized to form the Chorus collaboration, which I'll tell you about. And we were the second group of people to make a presentation to this group of agency people. The first group to present was the National Institutes of Health, and they said, I'm going to paraphrase because I wasn't there, not to worry, we have a public access platform, we have a public access plan, it's been in operation since April of 2008, and it works just fine, and I'm sure, look, most researchers like PubMed Central and its versions that have been mirrored over here. Some publishers actively support PubMed Central. Other publishers are quite skeptical of the fact that the largest funding agency in the world is spending money duplicating what publishers do, inventing their own identifiers, doing XML translations, posting our manuscripts on their platforms, so the readers go to PubMed Central as opposed to your platforms. And I think those are all valid arguments. From the standpoint of someone from another research agency that is asked to produce a plan now in less than 5 months on how to meet this directive, when an agency that has been doing it for a decade says, trust us, we'll do it for you, you know, I think several agencies will probably go along with it. But there was a very important proviso. One agency cannot do a service for another agency as a favor. And so it was made very clear that if National Institutes of Health was going to bring up a platform to host articles that are tagged from the funding of another agency, they would have to charge that agency money. And the price tag was a one-time $100,000 fee to join in, and $75 a manuscript in increments of 1,000 manuscripts. So to give you an example for the two agencies I know best, the Department of Energy and the National Science Foundation, from the best we can tell, we publish results funded from those two agencies at the tune of about 30,000 articles a year. I don't know that precisely because FundRef has only been up since May. But 30,000 manuscripts is roughly $3 million. And none of these agencies have $3 million to hand over to the National Institutes of Health. So that is a bit of a problem. So publishers came along with what sounded like a good deal. It still sounds like a good deal. I want you to think it sounds like a good deal because we're offering, as a group of publishers, to provide solutions to all the requirements in this memo for nothing from the agencies, because largely what is put into this project are services that uses infrastructure that we already use every day for our manuscript submission and publication process, largely through Crossref. So this collaboration was put together in March. We have a steering group of about 10 colleagues that represents a nice mixture between nonprofit and for-profit publishers. It has been endorsed by the Professional Scholarly Publishing Division of the American Association of Publishers and the STM Association. I'd love to see ALPS endorse it, and you have, thank you. And all of you are invited to a detailed presentation if you're going to be at the STM meeting in Frankfurt at the end of the STM workshop on that Tuesday. We very quickly outlined a proposal, put it together in draft form, and presented it to this interagency group, as I said, on their second meeting. There's a detailed proposal that has been shared with 70 or so publishers that have indicated they endorse this project. And if you're not on this list, please join, and we will send you that proposal. The proposal is called a discussion draft, because we're negotiating with the U.S. government. And all of you are familiar with business negotiations. If you put your first proposal up, made public, you have put your negotiating partner at a disadvantage. You want to keep the negotiations pretty quiet till you have a deal, then you make it public. So this discussion draft is not public, but anyone that has endorsed the proposal on the publishing side sees it. We have a website called chorusaccess.org, and we try to keep everyone up to date as to what's going on there. The key service provider is Crossref, and I'll explain why. So here are the key objectives. Public access involves identifying the articles that are tagged with public funding, providing access to it, some discoverability, because actually there's quite a bit of discoverability out there. You don't have to reinvent a lot. Proving that a manuscript has been made publicly available. There's a compliance element here. Steve talked about the difficulty of that here in the UK. And there's a Preservation Act aspect. Once you've made an article publicly accessible, it should remain that way, independent of whether a publisher goes belly up. This proposal touches on all of those. The key identification is provided by FundRef. FundRef was started as a FundRef pilot project involving 7 FundRef publisher members and 4 funding agencies, including the Department of Energy, National Science Foundation, and Wellcome Trust. And it's the perfect baseline for launching a public access initiative, because what's the first question you ask? What manuscripts are we talking about? And who are they funded by? Then you come to the access issue. Now, I'll ask you a very simple question. If a manuscript that has been tagged with public funding is going to be made publicly accessible, where do you want that manuscript to live? On some random repository or your platform? I think you know the answer. You want to put the eyeballs on your platform for business reasons, but also any other stakeholder would like to see the manuscript on the platform where the publisher takes care of it from the start of the submission process to when it is posted to when it's potentially modified and subsequently archived. So that's the key element of the Chorus proposal. It is Chorus will host no content. It is really a distributed network that relies on the infrastructure we have already put in place with Crossref. FundRef identifies the article. A DUI is given in the FundRef listing. You can go to FundRef at Crossref now and see about 20,000 manuscripts that are already up as of the trial. You hit the DUI, and you go to the publisher's platform. That allows that last item on the very bottom, low cost. The reason we can, as a group, tell the agencies this isn't going to cost you anything is because we're going to rely on the infrastructure we already have in place that we use day to day. Does that mean that Chorus has zero cost for us? Of course not. There have been 2 working groups, one a steering group and one a technical working group that has been working since March with 2 meetings a week. That has already cost the publishing community a lot of lost time and resources, and they're considerable. The PSP organization has bankrolled the initial pilot with a $250,000 contribution, and we are actively putting together a business plan to launch this much in the way that Crossref or ORCID was launched. So there's no cost to the agency. And that, as you can tell from my slide, what was in the White House memo, they don't have the money to spend. So we're presenting this as a public service by the publishing community, and we are making the investment to make it happen. The key benefits, it meets every requirement on the White House memo. We have told them, we want you, Mr. or Ms. Agency Head, to spend your research funds on research and not duplicate what the publishing community already does for you and can do with you more efficiently. Crossref estimates, because they've been involved from the beginning on the technical side, that basically 80% of the infrastructure we need to make Chorus happen is already there. Crossref is a trusted neutral party. It's trusted by everyone because of the way it was set up 13 years ago and the way it's run. Okay. And the FundRef initiative, which was the latest initiative coming out of Crossref, we view as sort of a model for how the Chorus project can go forward. It was started with a pilot that involved agencies giving advice on their needs and their requirements. So agencies didn't supply any real money, but they supplied some brain power and they supplied some ownership in the result. I know from talking to my colleagues at the Department of Energy that they were asked at one of these interagency meetings, so how much time did the Department of Energy spend on helping to develop FundRef during the one-year pilot? And the gentleman representing the Department of Energy said very clearly, 1/10 of an FTE. That was a pretty good deal for launching a new initiative that would allow manuscripts to be tagged with DOE funding. I won't go through this detailed slide. It's up on the Chorus Access website. It walks you through in detail how Chorus would work. Again, it's a distributed system. It hosts no content. It relies on what we do with our existing Crossref literature. Key deliverables include a dashboard that would look like this, that could be available, will be available to anyone at an agency head, any research officer at a university, a researcher himself, a publisher, just to find how many manuscripts have been tagged with a particular agency's funding line, how many manuscripts have been deposited on a publisher's website, and where have they been archived. This is real-time compliance data that can be given right off the proposed Chorus interface. We talked a lot about discovery services and realized that we couldn't ignore it, but we shouldn't put a lot of information, a lot of resources into discovery, because some of you have seen Simon Inger's study that came out earlier in the year about how researchers find our content. There's no one way. There were about 7 different channels. The major commercial search engines were only about 30% of the ways. So inventing some new search engine just for Chorus, when you're competing with companies called Google and Microsoft, that's just silly. But providing APIs so that other search engines, existing search engines in some of the agencies, existing search engines in some of the library tools, was viewed to be important to do. Steve brought up the issue of text mining and reuse. There's vague language in the White House memorandum about reuse of digital manuscripts. I think we're all nervous about opening up our platform from an arbitrary text and data mining robot, what it might do to the bandwidth into our platform, what detritus robot might be left behind. If you go and look at Crossref's new prospect service, Chorus is proposing this as a baseline for expanding text and data mining in a very reasonable, measured, and pragmatic way. Preservation is a big issue here because, as we've heard earlier in the day, many of our stakeholders don't trust us. The agencies, when they first heard this proposal, they said, well, this is amazing. This is all the publishers, or at least all the publishers in the room, have agreed to do this. This is magnanimous. It has all the features we want, but we don't believe you. We don't trust you. You're saying this now. What happens 5 years from now when one of the big publishers pulls out? And so we are on detailed negotiations on that eventuality. We've noted that publishers have multi-level backup for archival preservation. We, as a publisher, don't want our content to disappear, so we mirror our own sites, and we make arrangements with third parties like Portico and Clocks for long-term preservation. They countered, well, we're not part of that, and so we're looking at modifying these contracts so that agencies have some control of these things. The universities countered with their own proposal. You can read it on their website if you just Google share. It, again, is a distributed system. No one platform hosts content. It's interlinking university repositories. Now, if you want to ask yourself, is this an easy task to do? It's not an easy task to do. Those 3 university collaborations up there, AAU, APLU, and the Association of Research Libraries, put out this proposal, and they've announced a steering group, and they're working on it. I can't pretend to be an expert. I'm going to only show you this in one other slide about share, but go read about it. We've encouraged them. It should be a competitive environment. And we've noted the following. There are three things in common with the share proposal and the chorus proposal. They both depend on having persistent identifiers. For example, the FundRef identifier, tagging a manuscript with the funding agency. You want metrics to say, well, how well you were doing. And the last thing I mentioned under chorus was preservation methodology. That's already a joint publisher university collaboration. So we've proposed to our colleagues in the share collaboration, we at least should be working together on these three things because that's common. So what happens next? The agencies were supposed to submit their plans on August 22nd. I actually don't know how many did. I have a suspicion that very few did. I know of several large agencies that did not, and the reasons vary. Look, this is a complicated thing to do. I think they did not want to throw something across the bow, and I doubt these plans will be made public for many, many months, even in draft form. Okay? The Chorus project launched what was called a proof of concept this past Monday. If you are an endorsing publisher, you were sent a slide deck describing the proof of concept of the project. I urge you to look at that. And at the end of this month, we're launching a pilot. And I invite you all to come to the SDM Association meeting where there'll be a presentation of what this pilot looks like. Will any of the agencies take up working with Chorus? We think so. We believe the Department of Energy has made as firm a commitment as they can to working with us, because we've had a 2-year collaboration, first working on FundRef and on a prototype project to Chorus. They can't publicly say that they're going to be using Chorus yet because their plan hasn't been submitted. But if you go to the DOE website and look up pages for Public Access Gateway for Energy and Science, you'll see a prototype front end for their public access initiative that has language that notes they intend to work with Chorus if Chorus is implemented. So we're working very hard to make that happen. When the agencies submit their plans, they have to go through a review process by the White House Science Advisor Office and another administrative office called the Office of Management and Budget. These are the folks that put the president's budget together. So they'll be looking very carefully at, are you guys spending money you don't have? Are you taking advantage of outside resources? We hope that's a very important thing to do. It'll be an ongoing process, I think, at least over the next 6 months as these agencies develop their plans, as they hopefully will look at the Chorus pilot and begin to believe that publishers mean what they say. And with that, I want to thank the Chorus collaboration that has been working virtually full-time since March to make this happen, and I thank those publishers in the room that have signed on as signatories. And before we all melt in the heat, I'd like to open up the floor for questions for any of the 3 talks you heard this afternoon. And I thank you all for your attention under these global warming environment. Yes, sir. We have a microphone coming around in the middle there. It's coming. Stage right.
Brett Thomas from the American Chemical Society. Is Chorus being developed with an international?
Yes, I didn't get a chance to. it was started as clearly an initiative that would focus on the mandates, the directives from this U.S. agency. But there's nothing about the Chorus project that isn't international. It's based on cross-ref international standards, and we very much hope that it'll be embraced and used worldwide. Thank you for that question. In the back? Microphone's coming. Michael?
Michael May from STM. I'm very interested to hear you update us on all of this, Fred. I'm curious in what your reaction is to some of Eric's observations about the dire situation which we're in the European Union. Do you feel the same situation applies in the US, and how best we combat that?
I'm a little more optimistic than what I heard from Eric. Not about the funding of science with our constipated U.S. government at the moment, but I'm fairly optimistic that given the funding pressures in the U.S., that if publishers deliver on this commitment to do a multi-publisher, multi-agency solution for all the directives, hand them this as a public service, that I think when it's up and they can see the pilot and they can interact with it, I think they'd be hard-pressed not to commit. We have a tremendous trust issue that we're trying to overcome, but given their financial problems and given our commitment to try to make this work and be as accommodating as possible, I'm optimistic that this could be a pan-publisher, pan-agency solution that if we bedrock it in the U.S., I would very much like to see it exported over here. And I thank the STM Association for their support of this. In the back there, microphone is coming.
Hi, Catherine Spiller from Bioscientifica. I have a question about the UK. If all of the universities are pushing towards green, what's going to happen to the big block grants they've been given, which they can only spend on APCs?
Well, they probably won't spend them all. It's not true that they can only spend them on APCs. They can spend them, if you like, on fostering open access. In principle, most of the money is supposed to go to APCs. I suspect they won't spend them all this year. One Pro-Vice-Chancellor told me in July that his institution had funding for 555 papers this year, and they were getting 30 requests a month. So they're not going to spend all of that. I suggested to him it was because his institution's website pushed researchers very strongly towards green and said they had to make an exceptional case for gold. He didn't quite accept that, though they have changed their website since. But I think it's quite possible that they will not spend the full amount this year. But I don't think RC UK will mind too much, provided in good faith they're working towards its policy objectives.
David Thomas from Thomson Reuters. I think it was in your presentation that you said in Brussels, the persistent view, and maybe it's the same in the States, is that the publishers are carpetbaggers. They're getting free content, they're running it through a process and reselling it back to public institutions and making these, obscene profits. Is there any, this has been persistent for a long time, is there any risk of politicians grabbing on that and saying, oh my God, I'm going to do something great for the public and stop this?
No, I don't think so. I think the saving grace is that when you sit down with individual members of the European Commission or the DGs, the services, you can explain. And I think the people, at least those people that are dealing with our issues at this moment, understand that publishers do add value, and they've said so publicly. My problem is it took us a long time to get them that far, and in a year or two it'll be different people that are running those units, and we're in this endless Sisyphean task of keeping explaining, and it isn't complex. I mean, it isn't easy what we do to explain. It's a lot easier than most of us think. I think we stumble over ourselves and we make things more complicated than they need to be, not always, but often. But no, I don't think there's a risk of expropriation or mass. I think you'll see more things, and you see it here in the UK with Wellcome Trust and Peer J, and you see alternatives. But basically, it's the same thing, and we welcome it because it is additional competition, and the market will prove whether it's valid and viable or not. And if other people can do things better and for less, well, you know, that's the way it goes. But I don't think there's any danger of immediate expropriation, no. And I think once these people are reasonable, do not let the media or your politicians from splinter parties describe these people as idiots or bureaucrats who have no clue. They do have a clue. They have maybe not as deep a clue as we would like them to have, but they're not idiots. They're overworked, they have too much on their plates, and let's face it, we haven't made it really all that exciting and simple to understand. So.
Any other questions, or have we completely wilted? I want to thank my colleagues, Steve and Eric, for very good talks, and they've worked tirelessly on our behalf for the last several years in this effort. I want to thank ALPS for hosting this session, and I hope they forgive me for admitting that they are a co-signer on the course, and it was very important to get that co-signing. And we appreciate your attention to this important issue, and I hope you take the homework items that we gave you to heart. Thank you very much.
And vote! Of the European Commission or the DGs, the services, you can explain. And I think the people, at least those people that are dealing with our issues at this moment, understand that publishers do add value, and they've said so publicly. My problem is it took us a long time to get them that far, and in a year or two, it'll be different people that are running those units, and we're in this endless Sisyphean task of keeping explaining, and it isn't complex. I mean, it isn't easy what we do to explain. It's a lot easier than most of us think. I think we stumble over ourselves and we make things more complicated than they need to be, not always, but often. But no, I don't think there's a risk of expropriation or mass. I think you'll see more things, and you see it here in the UK with Wellcome Trust and Peer J, and you see alternatives. But basically, it's the same thing, and we welcome it because it is additional competition, and the market will prove whether it's valid and viable or not. And if other people can do things better and for less, well, you know, that's the way it goes. But I don't think there's any danger of immediate expropriation, no. And I think once these people are reasonable, do not let the media or your politicians from splinter parties describe these people as idiots or bureaucrats who have no clue. They do have a clue. They have maybe not as deep a clue as we would like them to have, but they're not idiots. They're overworked, they have too much on their plates, and let's face it, we haven't made it really all that exciting and simple to understand. So.
Any other questions, or have we completely wilted? I want to thank my colleagues, Steve and Eric, for very good talks, and they've worked tirelessly on our behalf for the last several years in this effort. I want to thank ALPS for hosting this session, and I hope they forgive me for admitting that they are a co-signer on the course, and it was very important to get that co-signing. And we appreciate your attention to this important issue, and I hope you take the homework items that we gave you to heart. Thank you very much.
And vote!